Good evening and welcome to Economics 330, Global Trade and Political Economy at the City University of New York, Medgar Evers College. My name is O. Felix Obi, and I would be your instructor for the class. This is, of course, our first lecture and office hour for spring 2025 semester. And today is Tuesday, January 28th, 2025. Let's quickly address a few housekeeping matters before beginning our formal lecture. Kindly pay particular attention to dates for this week's assessments. Looking ahead, please note that your midterm would be a term paper, and we will go into detail as the midterm dates approach. Office and hour and lecture will be on Tuesdays at 6 p.m. and on Zoom. This is an asynchronous class, so attendance is strongly encouraged, but optional. I will, however, endeavor to put Zoom lecture videos on the class Brightspace page. Please also note that you are required to turn on your camera at least once during office hour lecture to confirm your identity, maintain academic integrity, among other reasons. Please look out for office hour lecture announcements on Mondays, except holidays, with a Zoom link. Weekly assessments will open on Mondays, except holidays, by 12:01 a.m. And submission due date, again, except holidays, will be 11:59 p.m. on Fridays. Please endeavor to read and familiarize yourself with the class syllables, including where it clearly states that there will not be makeup work and that all assignments must be submitted on time and through Brightspace. Let us now circle back to broader fundamentals. This course is designed to provide you with analytical tools essential for understanding the complex reality of politics and policy making as they relate to international trade and trade relations among nations. To achieve our course objectives, you will be assigned readings in contemporary and historical discussions of trade policies in the United States, in foreign countries and international forums such as the World Trade Organization, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, World Bank Group, the United Nations, and as called differently, UN, and especially the International Monetary Fund, or IMF. You will analyze complex as well as simple issues that relate to philosophical and practical conflicts that impact trade relations and economic development nationally and internationally. We will begin by explaining the role of trade among nations and in the USA. We will then discuss politics and how it affects policy making, an area of public interest with regard to trade in particular. While there are conflicts between policy proposals and implementations, there are global and national institutions established to facilitate trade and reduce sources of conflict in international trade. To understand the conflicts better, we will also lay some foundation in political theory as they relate to international trade relations and domestic conflicts regarding trade. We will close with specific international institutions that are cited as the cause of existing conflicts and frictions in domestic and international trade relations. We will conclude the semester by discussing possible recommendations for solutions to present and potential future sources of conflict. It is helpful to note that we will achieve our course objectives by mastering the learning objectives for each module. That said, our learning objectives for this week, our module 1, is to develop a foundational knowledge for the study of global trade and political economy. So, which brings us to a number of questions that form the core of our learning objectives for the week. The first question is, what is international trade and why is trade among nations beneficial? International trade is the purchase and sale of goods and services by companies or consumers in different countries. These may include consumer goods, raw materials, food, and machinery, which are all bought and sold in the international market. Trade among nations is beneficial because the commerce allows countries to expand their markets and access goods and services that otherwise may not be available domestically. As a result of international trade, the market is more competitive. This ultimately results in more competitive pricing and thus brings cheaper products to consumers. Some countries engage in international trade by treating imported goods the same as those produced domestically. The second question then second learning objective is, how does the U.S. economy benefit from international trade and investment? According to the Executive Office of the President's according to the Executive Office of the President's Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, the United States is the world's largest economy and the largest exporter and importer of goods and services. International trade is critical to America's prosperity, fueling economic growth, supporting good jobs at home, raising living standards, and helping Americans provide for their families with affordable goods and services. Put differently, the U.S. economy benefits from international trade and investment by creating jobs, boosting economic growth, increasing access to a wider variety of goods and services at potentially lower prices, promoting efficiency through specialization, and allowing companies to compete on a global scale, ultimately strengthening the overall U.S. economy by expanding market reach and generating additional revenue through exports. On the productive side of the economy, expanding trade allows production inputs such as labor and capital to be used more effectively, which raises overall productivity. U.S. businesses that grow in response to increased market access abroad support additional jobs. Global competitive pressures mean that these firms are typically more productive and rely more on capital and skilled labor, and on average than similar non-exporting firms. While on the consumption side of the economy, international trade helps U.S. consumers' budgets go further. Because our trading partners also specialize in the goods and services for which they are relatively more productive, the prices for those goods and services in the United States are lower than if we could only consume what we produce. Trade also offers a much greater diversity of consumption opportunities, from year-round fresh fruit to affordable clothing. In fact, research estimates that the variety of imported goods increased approximately threefold between 1972 and 2001. This increase in variety provides U.S. consumers with value equivalent to 2.6% of gross domestic product, or GDP. According to other estimates, the reduction in U.S. tariffs since World War II contributed an additional 7.3% to U.S. GDP, or approximately 1.2 trillion as far back as 10 years ago in 2014. Distributed equally, that translates to an additional over 10,000 in income per American household. 3, the third learning objective is, though trade is beneficial, why then is there conflict within and among nations regarding trade? And that is a very important question. If we all say that international trade is important, why are there so much conflict? Especially if you listen to the news lately, you would hear much about the incoming of the new administration complain about how America is sometimes treated unfairly in the international trade arena. And part of the reason is because international trade conflict within and among nations can occur due to power competition. The growing discontent towards globalization, the decline of global trade governance, tensions from the rise of global value chains, domestic interest in institutions, trade deficit, and exchange rate misalignment. Furthermore, resistance to international trade and associated trade barriers may also arise due to concerns about job losses in domestic industries that cannot compete with cheaper foreign imports. Another reason is fear of exploitation of workers in developing countries, including environmental damage from production overseas and the perception that trade agreements disproportionately benefit large corporations, leading to political pressure from affected workers and industries to protect their interests through trade barriers like tariffs and quotas. More recently, countries, including the United States, and as I've just mentioned, have imposed tariffs on imports from countries accused of non-market economic policies and practices. These countries are accused of industrial subsidies to gain unfair market advantage. Note that subsidies cause a misalignment between price and production cost in the global economy, aka, or also known as non-market policy. And this impairs the efficient operation of the free trade market. These are real challenges that face global trade. So the fourth learning objective is, what is the globalization of trade? Hence, what is international political economy? Globalization of trade refers to the increasing integration of national economies worldwide through the exchange of goods and services across borders. Essentially, meaning that countries are becoming more interconnected through international trade, facilitated by factors including technological advancements and reduced trade barriers, leading to a global market where products and services can be bought and sold freely between nations. International political economy is the study of how politics shapes the global economy and how the global economy shapes politics. A key focus in international political economy is on the distributive consequence of global economic exchange. Others take the view that international political economy, or IPE, is the study of the political battle between the winners and losers of global economic exchange. The fifth and second to last, I believe, of the learning objectives is, what has been the role of the US and other governments and their economy since World War II? Note that especially post-World War II, the United States has led the establishment of a rules-based international system, including the global institutions such as the World Bank Group, the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, and the United Nations, among others, that undergird the rules-based international order. The sixth learning objective is, what developments have taken place over time to facilitate world trade and to remove impediments to trade imposed since World War II? To which the establishment of international and regional trade finance and trade regulators, including regional trade agreements such as USMCA. For those who do not know, USMCA means US-Mexico-Canada Trade Agreement, and it used to be called the North America Free Trade Area, on NAFTA, which pretty much turns the geographic region beginning from Mexico through the United States to Canada into one cohesive market. These are some of the foundational frameworks that inform this week's learning activity. So let me conclude by reminding the class that next week we will discuss why barriers to trade exist. So rather than focus on the types of barriers that exist, we'll instead focus our attention on how different constituencies nationally and internationally attempt to limit trade, even as there is broad agreement that trade is beneficial. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I'm glad to open the floor to questions, and I thank you for listening. And I will now turn off the recording.